Number 10. Jordan Grider. Jordan Grider's disappearance has left law enforcement and true crime enthusiasts stumped since his campground in northern Minnesota was found back in 2018. During the dead of winter, the 29-year-old decided to go camping by himself. Even though the Appalachian Trail is known to be extremely dangerous that time of year, Jordan was eager to take on the challenge. Little did he know it'd be the last trip he'd take. His family wasn't worried when he didn't contact them for a while, since he had always been a survivalist that loved being outside. Once enough time passed to raise concern, the search started. Luckily, Jordan parked his truck on a private area of the trail, so police were notified quickly. When they finally found his camping spot, they saw a considerable amount of blood in the hammock and sleeping bag. It took officials days to find hand and arm bones belonging to Grider. But even with this and years passing after the initial incident, the majority of his body has still not been discovered. Some think he was eaten by wolves after an accident, but what do you think happened to Jordan? Number 9. Jolie Harris. Jolie Harris searched Google for windpipe location and antifreeze while on a camping trip with her girlfriend. Harris seemed curious if antifreeze had any particular flavor and how long it might take a human to die after drinking it. A camper discovered the pair just a few days later resting under a blanket. Her partner was motionless and Harris said they'd been attacked. Not long after, the police arrived and pronounced the woman dead. She'd bled out from a head wound and suffered a serious cut to her throat. Harris, on the other hand, received only minor injuries from the supposed attack, and it didn't take a genius to name Harris as the primary suspect since there was no evidence that anyone else had been at the scene. Despite the fact that she was charged with her partner's death, no information regarding her trial has been leaked to the public since. Number 8. Maxine Bainton. Maxine Bainton and her husband had spent the day walking before heading to a bar to sit down for lunch with their 4 sons. Then they quickly returned to their camping spot in Pistol, Wales. Bainton's spouse claimed that each had a bottle of wine during the day. When the day was over, he went to his camper van for the night, but his wife wanted to stay up a little longer. Bainton's husband was shocked when he woke up around 1 a.m. to find his wife hadn't come to bed. He found her face down on the ground and immediately called for help. Bainton, though, was already gone. Her death was linked to alcohol poisoning, according to an autopsy. She had more than 4 times the legal driving limit, and coroners found that the ethanol levels were revealed to be extremely high in the alcohol, and it basically poisoned Bainton. It's possible that the amount of booze consumed at the time of her death was significantly higher than what was suspected. Number 7. Amanda Eller. Amanda Eller, a hiker, survived for 17 days in the dense Hawaiian forest back in 2019. Eller's terrible story began with a 3-mile or just under 5-kilometer trek. She'd taken a different route than usual, though, and decided to stop, meditate, and nap. When the 35-year-old yoga instructor woke up, she couldn't find her way back to the car since she hadn't taken her phone with her. Eller survived for more than 2 weeks by eating berries and guava where she could find them while traveling through the thick forest. She drank river water only when it seemed clear enough to make sure it didn't make her sick. Aside from basic needs like food and shelter, Eller had to deal with a broken tibia and a horrific sunburn that quickly got infected. After her shoes were washed away in a freak flash flood, she had to walk barefoot. Eller eventually came to a point where the terrain made it impossible for her to keep walking. There was little to no food, and Amanda was afraid she would die there. Thankfully, she was seen by a search helicopter as she came out from a valley and was evacuated out of the wilderness. Eller had shed 15 pounds or just under 7 kilograms over those weeks and had multiple infections, as well as a fractured foot. But doctors were certain she would make a complete recovery. Do you think you could have survived? Let us know down in those comments, and if you like the video so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Number 6. KYLEN Schulte and Crystal Turner. KYLEN Schulte and Crystal Turner went camping on a regular basis. The newlyweds lived in a converted van and usually camped in Moab, Utah, where they both worked. When the weather was nice, the 2 women would set up a tent and sleep outside. But when Turner failed to come in to work at McDonald's on Monday, August 16, 2020, her co-workers got worried and called the police. Schulte and Turner were found dead near their tent in the La Salle Mountains 2 days later. They had been shot. The sheriff's office in Utah revealed little to no information about the killings, with one of the few public remarks claiming that there was no current danger to the public in the region. This just sparked more questions, since the county sheriff instead urged campers to be on high alert after officials discovered a stash of more than 30 weapons at a man's campsite near Telluride, just 2.5 hours from Moab. The warning came 4 days after officials declared that the unsolved killings posed no threat to the public. Sound safe to you? Schulte and Turner, the victims, had been together for almost 2 years and had just gotten married in April 2021 in Arkansas, where Turner is from. The two were last seen in public on August 13th when they were out for drinks with friends at a local bar called Woody's Tavern. They apparently complained about a man who was causing problems at their campsite and told their friends they were about to move because of him. Then Turner didn't come to work. Officers checked a nearby campsite but were unable to locate the bodies. Meanwhile, volunteer search and rescue teams were established on the ground in Moab and began the search. Schulte's aunt began posting on social media asking for help to find the missing women, when a family acquaintance also reached out and offered to begin looking on his own. On August 18th, the acquaintance spotted the woman's van while scouting a campsite. There, he found Schulte's body. He contacted her father and then the police, who confirmed that Schulte and Turner had been found dead in the mountains. Number 5. Ioana Hosiota. Ioana Hosiota was trying to become the youngest person to hike the Grand Canyon from beginning to end in February of 2012. Hosiota traveled to the United States from Romania while she was in her teens and was introduced to the canyons by a man that would later become her husband. Before the 24-year-old set off on a record-breaking attempt, the couple got married in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the canyon's valleys. During the trek, Hosiota and her hiking partner were on different paths, about 20 yards or about 18 meters apart when they crossed into the southern rim of the Owl Eyes Canyon. Hosiota was around 80 miles or just under 130 kilometers from her destination at the time. She was higher up when her husband started to hear little rocks falling from the sky. Then there was a tremendous thud. Hosiota's lifeless body was discovered on a rock ledge after she had fallen 300 feet or just over 90 meters. While little is known about the circumstances surrounding her fall, it is believed she slipped on one of those loose rocks. Devastated by her death, Hosiota's husband vowed he would finish the last leg of her hike while carrying a lock of her hair. Number 4. Michael St. Laurent. Michael St. Laurent, a seasoned hiker, was lost on a route in North Vancouver, Canada for 9 days. The 45-year-old set out on the Grouse Mountain hike expecting it to take him about 8 hours round trip. But due to adverse weather conditions, St. Laurent was forced to spend the night on the mountain. He'd taken a tarp and a dry change of clothes with him, which helped him survive the bitter cold. The next day, with injuries to his hip and knee after wandering off the established track, he was much more disoriented. Hypothermia had also begun to set in. By day 3, St. Laurent had lost track of time and thought he'd been lost for months. He was trembling violently by the end of the first week, overtaken by pain and haunted by bizarre hallucinations as he dredged through the chilly woods. He had difficulty telling between what was real and what was not, but he had the foresight to cover up with a tarp at night, which was probably what saved his life. St. Laurent's feet had become severely frostbitten, and he could feel his organs shutting down by the time he arrived at a helicopter landing zone. An off-duty rescue worker and her boyfriend found him. They gave him first aid and finally airlifted him out of the wilderness. In the aftermath of the tragedy, St. Laurent claimed that the experience taught him to always leave with a companion, no matter how short the trek is. Number 3. Geraldine Largay. Geraldine Largay and a friend hiked a special section of the famous Appalachian Trail in 2013, a route that connects Springer Mountain in Georgia to Mount Katahdin all the way in Maine. The 66-year-old retired nurse and her friend Jane Lee had left from West Virginia, where they planned to travel over 1,100 miles or just under 1,800 kilometers together, with Largay's spouse giving supplies along the way. Due to a family situation, Lee had to leave the hike in late June, and Largay, though, was determined to finish the journey on her own. Several weeks later, she was only 200 miles or just about 325 kilometers from her destination in northern Maine, where a photo was taken of her by another hiker. This would be the last time anyone saw Largay alive. On July 22nd, she tried texting her husband to let him know that she had gotten lost, but the message was lost due to a poor cell reception. A search was started, but no evidence of Largay was ever found. It would be almost 2 years later before a logging surveyor discovered the woman's campground and remains. She had died inside her tent, zipped up in her sleeping bag. Through her suffering, she continued to write in her journal until mid-August 2013. With little hope of rescue and dwindling resources, Largay wrote in one of her final postings that she hoped whoever discovered her body would tell her family. Number 2. LOUISA, VESTERAGER, JESPERSEN, and MAREN In December of 2018, LOUISA, VESTERAGER, JESPERSEN of Denmark and MAREN of Norway were found beheaded in the High Atlas Highlands. Not long after, 3 Islamic State followers were captured in connection with the horrifying event. The convictions of ringleader Abdemesamad Yud, Yunus Uzwaid, and Rashid Afadi could come after social media petitions called for their executions. During the trial, it was revealed that 2 of the men had beheaded the 2 women, while Afadi took a video of the murders on his phone. The decision on the case came after an 11-week trial in Saleh near the capital of Rabat. Ijud confessed to murdering one of the 2 women and expressed regret. He also said to have received a prison sentence in Morocco for attempting to join the Islamic State in Syria before being released back in 2015. The 3 men all proudly declared that they were IS supporters, but IS had not claimed any responsibility for these killings. Kevin Zoller Guerreros, one of the men's accomplices, was also apprehended. He was a Spanish-Swiss convert to Islam who was suspected of teaching the suspects how to use encrypted messaging services as well as how to handle weapons. He was sentenced to 20 years in jail. Jespersen and KYLEN, the victims, were roommates at Norway's Bo University. Their remains were discovered in a tent in a remote spot near Mount Tabuki, Morocco's highest peak, and also a popular hiking destination. Both had taken all the necessary equipment for their journey and wouldn't have been in harm's way. The women were merely on a Christmas camping trip while trying to become tour guides. The killers took 4 days to identify the women as targets before carrying out the attack. They picked these girls because other potential victims were all with guides. Moroccan authorities were strongly criticized by Jespersen's lawyer for neglecting to monitor the suspects' activities, which could have saved the women's lives. The Jespersen family asked the Moroccan government for $1 million in compensation for their, quote, moral responsibility. The court, however, denied this. Instead, each of the 3 individuals convicted were required to pay $200,000 in restitution, a small price to pay, considering the lives they took. Number 1. Michael Knapinski. Michael Knapinski of Seattle and a friend were on a snowy trip through Mount Rainier in November 2020. The 45-year-old and his partner then split up. When his friend kept going on the skis, Knapinski used snowshoes, and after Michael failed to arrive at the rendezvous point later that night, the emergency services were called. The man had been trapped in whiteout conditions and was discovered the next day by rescue aircraft. Knapinski was unconscious when he was transported to Seattle's Harborview Medical Center. He went into cardiac arrest as doctors began to treat him. His heart and lungs were bypassed and he was connected to an oxygenation machine, or ECMO, one of the most revolutionary types of life support in the world. In layman's terms, it pumps blood outside the body into a machine that removes the carbon dioxide and returns oxygen-rich blood to the body. Basically, taking the place of his heart after it had stopped for more than 45 minutes, this method effectively brought Knapinski back to life. He didn't remember much about the incident and thought he'd fallen during a whiteout based on the scrapes and bruises he had on his body. Following his return from clinical death, Knapinski said he would devote his life to helping others. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get mauled by a bear or fall off a 100-foot cliff? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.